we'll get to it then. So let me just introduce myself. Give me a few minutes to do that. My name's Mark Paterson. I work for 3Search. I have been in go-to-market recruitment for about 15 years. It wasn't my first career. I had a career in sales actually before that. But I've spent around 9, 10 years in exec hiring, go-to-market, and about 2 or 3 years directly recruiting RevOps, although I've recruited roles that sounded and looked similar prior to the actual term being better known. Outside of work, I have 3 sons. I'm a ghostwriter and a very keen amateur magician. So if anyone wants to talk magic and mentalism, that's my bag. And look, clearly I'm not a RevOps professional myself. I don't want to claim to be, and there will be lots of questions that you have that I'm not qualified to answer. Although I could probably muddle through because I do understand RevOps better than most non-RevOps people. But I think better to ask a RevOps professional about some of the more technical aspects of your role. And James has a ton of content and a podcast and a mentoring program that I've been part of. So there's tons of stuff out there for that. Lots of RevOps communities. So me explaining how to do your day job isn't time well spent. But what I am is someone that talks to hundreds of RevOps leaders and RevOps contributors daily. I don't speak to hundreds daily, but I speak to hundreds throughout the year, and I understand both your frustrations and what nourishes you in a role. I understand what hiring business leaders think they want, what they actually want. I assess predominantly for non-technical skills, which I believe is the most crucial aspect, or one of the most crucial aspects. Most importantly, I advise, support, and guide RevOps leaders in their careers. So I talk about you as a person. My perspective is zoomed out, but really about how do you maximize your career, whether you're looking for your next role or you just want to advance your current one. I don't think it matters how junior or senior you are. Some of the things I think are fundamental, but what nourishes me in my role is seeing people progress, which I know sounds a bit hippie in a cutthroat world of B2B and recruitment, but it's outcomes that I care about, and the best outcome beyond finding someone a dream job, I think is for that dream job to elevate them further and see long-term progress. So it makes what I do massively worthwhile. Plus, I am an old hippie. So once this session's over, if anyone who isn't already connected to me, and I'm sure there's probably lots that I'm happy to continue to advise and support with career mining questions when I have time. Final 2 points. What I say isn't the finite truth. It's based on experience and opinion. And forgive me if I repeat myself, but I think there's a few things here that are worth repeating. And very final thing before I get to the first point is a shout out to James and Josh at Account Aim. I really am grateful for them to have me here. I think they're an exceptional organization, so smart, so proactive. They do tons for the RevOps community. The mentoring program is superb if you haven't joined it, so you should spend some time looking at that, and absolutely the Account Aim software. I think you've won 7 G2 awards in 2025 so far. That's just so far. So
you'll make me blush. Appreciate the
there we
plug,
go.
Mark.
I'm not going to mention them again. That's it. So let's talk about the RevOps ladder. I have this. This is the only slide I have, which may or may not be a good thing. The traditional ladder, the realistic career path. I don't think being in RevOps is always linear at all. It's very much a new profession. Whether we can date it back 5 years or 6 years, I mean, it's still pretty new. There's less career data, especially if you compare it to sales and marketing, which has hundreds of years. So a lot of the information about RevOps careers and progression is still anecdotal, And for data-driven people like most of you, this might be quite tough to take. But I talk to a myriad of RevOps contributors and leaders who all have really varied backgrounds. Um, I you know you could probably uh, compare a RevOps professional to a fingerprint. Everyone's incredibly different. And I do see more traditional linear ladders like the one here in the US more than in Europe because I think Europe is a few years behind, which is where I am, by the way. I'm based in London, if you didn't recognize my accent. Um, and I recruit globally, so I have a view of what it's like in the US, what it's like in the UK, which I think is probably the second best market for RevOps, and then further into Europe. I haven't really explored beyond that, but I think people in Europe are entering the profession from slightly stranger angles. In the US, there is slightly more linear direction. And titles, by the way, I think titles are almost meaningless given the varied nature of RevOps, because I don't know if you agree, James, but VP RevOps in one company could be the same as a senior manager in another. I think it's semantics.
Yeah, and I think like there's a maturity element too, which is why that realistic career path you said that might be a little bit more common in the UK or in Europe too, and it might just be maturity because RevOps does so much, it's so focal to the entire customer journey that I think it's natural for folks to veer off and dig into strategic ops or SDR manager or director of sales as it has on the slide here, and so it's still a very nebulous term, I feel like.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, I mean, look, in an ideal world, it would look like that on the left-hand side, that you progress from, an analyst, sales ops, into maybe marketing or sales ops, into a traditional, manager, senior manager, director, VP, SVP, and then C-suite, which we'll come back to. Um, but I think it's much more, even in the US, along the lines of, you were in tech, then maybe you're a consultant, and then suddenly you became an SDR manager by happenstance. Then you're running strategic operations, and you get into sales, then you're in RevOps, then you're a chief of staff, then you're back in RevOps. That uh, uh, honestly, I I don't think that shifting around unconventionally is a problem. And the reality is more like the right hand side. People move in and out of roles, but the 2020s really is about unconventional career shifting, um, and especially as the core function of RevOps is an amalgam of so many areas, like you said, James. It's like the center of a Venn diagram. So you've got all of these pieces that can bring you to this career, and uh, you can draw from them and move back into them. I think where you come from and where you go are open, which I think is an advantage of RevOps. So there's no rules as to how you climb the ladder. You can take
And
your time. Sorry.
Mark, real quick, this you can kind of punt this if you'd like, but it seems kind of relevant to career path in EMEA versus US as you kind of lay out the differences in structure, although it's never the same everywhere. We have a question in the chat, and again, encourage everyone to post these in real time.
Yeah.
Was she the uh, attendee asked if you could share any perspective on trying to transition from the US to EMEA while staying in RevOps. So I'm curious if there's an element to tie in here based on these two different ladders that skew one to the other, or just generally if you have any perspective on that.
Um, Other than physically moving countries, unless it's a remote role, I see no reason why that transition could not be relatively smooth. In some ways, Europe has adopted the US methodologies and use case for RevOps in the first place. We tend to get everything from you next. I think customer success was the last function that was evolved in the US, probably in big tech, and so the value there is in Europe. Call it Europe, the sibling of the US. Um, what you're bringing is value. There's no reason why you couldn't take it back the other way, but um, yeah, maybe we could explore that slightly later. But I don't see that even being an issue. and I
Cool.
and I see that being hugely viable. Um, the most important question really to ask is where do you want to get to? So what do you want to reach at the top of the ladder? And are you making it easier for yourself to get there? The more important point I want to raise, which applies to all jobs, really, not just RevOps, but I honestly believe this is important. And I wonder if people think about this, um, and maybe we do a quick poll or a quick question, but are you having an intentional career or are you having a passive career? So a passive career, you go with the flow, you might take calls from recruiters, but you lack a direction. You'll probably stay in a job longer than you should because it's comfortable. If the business moves you, you move. If it gets rid of you, you go. But it's not proactive career. It's about locus of control, which I can come back to, but this internal locus of control and external locus of control. Um, very, very quickly, the locus of control relates to whether you see yourself responsible for what happens in your life or whether you see it as external factors. So I'll come back to that. Um, and actually, I'll talk about that when we talk about interviews. Most people start their career um, with a passive start. Everyone says, I fell into this. Oh, I fell into RevOps. I fell into sales. Never meant to get it. I fell into recruitment, if I'm honest with you. Um, hopefully it wasn't a crash landing, but I hear this a lot. The point is, how do you actively push yourself out into something more intentional? So what is an intentional career? And I'll stop. I'll stop my screen now. That's okay. So intentional career is where you're the driver, not the passenger. You've got a clear vision, goals as to where you want to get to. You actively seek out, research, educate what your career moves are going to be. You make deliberate decisions based on your goals. That also helps you to seek out learning, development, mentorship. You might come to webinars about your career, like this one. So perhaps I am preaching to the choir here, but I think this is a really important point that people either are doing or not doing, but they don't think about it necessarily. I suppose if your career is intentional, you are thinking about it. Um, but if it's not, I think you should, and it really helps you to shape your personal branding. And whilst if you're intentional in your career, nothing always goes your way. I think there's much more chance you'll adapt and pivot when you have long-term goals. Um, so the key point in an intentional career, everything you do will be driving you towards the next rung of the ladder, however small it is. Um, and here's another key point. I think I think hiring managers and recruiters like me and anyone assessing you for a job, whether it's internal or external, they love intentional careers. They love it because intentional careerists are seen as top talent. They really are. I think the reason being, um, it feels and by the way, it might be a misnomer. You're not necessarily superior to someone who's running a passive career, but I guess the optics are there that you appear driven, you understand your value, you can articulate why a specific job aligns with your career trajectory, and you're looking for a strategic move, not just a job. So I wonder if I don't know, Dave, you want to ask if who feels they have an intentional career and who feels they have a passive career.
Yeah, maybe we can do it through just the hand raise feature as kind of an ad hoc poll. So if you feel
Yeah,
like you do have an intentional career, go ahead and hit the hand raise button here, and we'll do a quick count in the attendee chat. And meanwhile, I'll just add, Mark, my experience is I've seen that development is so much easier and more likely to come your way when you know what you want to. If you can tell your direct manager that this is what you want to get better at for this reason, it makes it really easy for them to kind of develop you and
exactly.
invest in you.
This is it. This is about declaring your intentions early on, and I'll probably come back to that. But when we talk about reaching the C-suite, where do you want to go in RevOps? And it is a tricky one. I don't think I want to labor this too much because it's an ongoing, LinkedIn favorite. Where would RevOps go in the C-suite? And I ask people all the time because of the overlap and underlap in your work. You know, you touch upon all these functions, but there are gaps. So I guess the question is who has considered reaching the C-suite, and maybe in the chat as well, people can say CRO, CFO, CMO. I mean, I don't think it's an issue uh, if you haven't, if you have um, no uh, appetite to reach the C-suite. Um,
And Mark, sorry, I just launched a formal poll here. We had this one queued up. So for the last one of who thinks they have an intentional career, that was about half the audience. And then we also
yeah,
just
okay,
launched the poll
interesting.
for kind of for folks, if you aspire to the C-suite, if so, which position, and a couple other questions. So if folks want to hit the poll
Okay,
button down there,
perfect.
we'll fill these out too.
Perfect. That'd be really good. I'd be really interested in that. Those who are having an intentional career, great. And you know, we'll continue the conversation about what that means. Those who are not, um, I'm not pointing the finger or saying, well, you're doing something wrong. Um, but you can probably shift a little bit into more intentional, because that what I'm suggesting is you will have more control over your destiny and what you do, rather than others having control over the direction you take. And actually, no one cares about your career more than you do. Um, I care about people's careers, but not more than you do. So really, you should be driving it as much as you possibly can. Um, I think if you have aspirations to reach the C-suite, whether that's soon or further away, then I think being more intentional is going to guide. I mean, the earlier the better. I advise my children who are not even in work to be intentional about what job they want, because it makes it easier to strive towards something. And actually, I met an Olympic rower yesterday, who won a I think he won a medal at the London 2012. But he said everything. My only mission running up to the Olympics was to win an Olympic gold. Everything I did was to achieve that, whatever it was, day to day, week to week, had to support that overarching mission. So if you can have a mission, then you really have much more direction in your role in RevOps. You can understand what you're not doing and lean into towards those sort of things. Um, I mean, for example, if you want to be a COO and you know that early, build that into your journey, drive your career towards that. What does it take to be a COO, or to be a successful COO? What routes did your current COO take, or others? I mean, you can track it. You can track people's careers on LinkedIn. You can look at them, um, and you can use that information to try and build out the journey that you're having. So try to identify the gaps, that mean that you will be credibly considered for roles that you want to go for. Assess those gaps early on, um, because you can be continually narrowing the gaps, and trying to narrow the gap as you're heading for a role that soon is, it might be too late. Um, so with a COO, is there a world of biz ops that you've not touched, and then maybe figure out how to upskill yourself, or maybe you take a biz ops role next to augment your experience, and then you get back into RevOps. The linear isn't crucial, remember. So being intentional will open the door for you, and will take specific responsibilities. Um, I want to say a quick word about how you guys are exceptional. Um, I, I'm not saying it to win favor at all. I'm saying it because I mean it, and actually that's why I've opted to work in this field and to recruit in the RevOps world. I think RevOps Alliance, when I joined them, they asked me for a quote about the industry, and I just said something really nice about the incredible talent of RevOps. I don't know how well that went, but if anyone went to the I think RevOps AF, Matt Volm opened his keynote with, you are the most important people in a business. And I think he's right. I think you're the keys to unlocking growth. You have a huge role to fulfill, while simultaneously you're justifying your own work. You're dealing with company politics, which I used that phrase on LinkedIn recently, and I was told not to. You can't say politics. It's stakeholder management. But you're dealing with egos. RevOps is fundamentally about change, incremental change. It's about major change. And you need to unlock that change while managing the status quo, managing egos, bending, not breaking things. Um, and people will tell you that you don't directly generate revenue. I would argue that without you, revenue will stagnate, will decline, and you can and you are responsible for significant change. You're a force multiplier, you're a force for good. You are exceptional, and I really think it's important for you to remember that because in the day to day, and some of the people I speak to, they're in a bubble. They forget that they are massively valuable, even if the business doesn't demonstrate that. And if they're not showing that, it's possibly because your personal PR is terrible. Um, there is obviously a world in which the business doesn't appreciate you because the culture is rotten and leadership don't get it. But I would I would argue, and I'm okay to carry rambling on here, James. I'm just continuing on.
Yo, yes, totally. I have two questions I want to cover that relate to some prior topics, but finish the thought and we'll circle back to those.
Um, Fine. Well, look. I'll finish this thought about your personal PR. I actually do think it's terrible, and um, it's very generalized. But I think you can all do better. The people who are great at doing your PR, RevOps PR, are people like me, recruiters who are trying to advocate for RevOps in businesses. People like James and Josh in software businesses, consulting businesses. But I don't see RevOps themselves being that good at it. It's not that you don't respect your own profession. I just think you're very humble. A lot of people I know are builders, low ego, which I think is probably one of the most attractive thing about RevOps. You don't crave the spotlight. You're there to make other people look good. And I just mentioned, um, you don't directly um, increase revenue. I actually just came off the phone with an exec recruiter for a very, very well-known PE fund, one of the biggest in the world. And she said, "Oh, the problem people have with RevOps is they don't generate revenue." And I said, "Yeah, I don't agree. I mean, I just actually didn't believe what she was saying. I was quite speechless. Um, so, but it's partly because your PR needs work. And if someone like that who is working with RevOps leaders and putting them in highly prominent high growth businesses, if she thinks that or thinks other people do that, then it's probably true. Um, how good are people here at explaining what they do? Just I don't mean to the business, but to the wider world. Do you think about what your job is, or are you too deeply in the role getting on with it without considering how others see you? Could you walk into a room of people who know nothing about RevOps, who've never heard of it, and give them a decent appraisal of what RevOps actually is to lay people? Um, I think operation roles are underappreciated massively. Um, but why would literally the blood, sweat, and tears that you put in to the work that you do be underappreciated or misunderstood because your personal PR is probably not good.
I think,
Um,
Mark,
yeah,
that's so important. On the podcast a few times, we've interviewed folks that are senior directors, VPs of RevOps, and they touch on this point too in slightly different verbiage, but they say like you really have to connect your work to the metrics that matter to your bosses in the business. So I totally agree. A pet peeve of mine is the notion that RevOps is not revenue generating. Maybe it's not generating, but it's obviously revenue enabling. And this ties back to like the metrics that matter point. If you can show how you increase rep ramp time or how you made reps more efficient to close more revenue, or as we spoke about with Will Sullivan on the webinar last week, to reduce cost. That's hugely valuable to the business. And I think you have to make that really clear to everyone in the business that that's your role and that's what you're doing. And that's why it's so important.
totally. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I guess it's a bit like saying hiring a salesperson isn't revenue generating, because the act of hiring a salesperson doesn't generate revenue. Them selling does, but the impact of hiring a salesperson leads to the revenue. I think that's kind of typifies the attitude there. I think modesty is a virtue, but it will trip you up. So remember, no one cares more about your career than you should. So I think it's about how to push your personal agenda without betraying your own modesty or lack of ego, if you have it. And if you have an ego, and if you're not modest, then use that. Um, Possibly build a record of everything you do, quantify what you're doing. Um, Very, very often I'll interview someone and they will walk me through what they've done, but really they've never quantified it. They've almost taken it for granted and not stepped away from the project to look back
Yeah.
through the eyes of someone like me, or someone who wants to understand. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Um,
and we've actually seen folks use Accounting as just a data tool to track ROI of their initiative. So if we started this initiative and it's going to move this KPI, what was that KPI beforehand? How do we tease out the impact of the initiative versus what else is happening in the business? And that's been a really powerful way to show impact as well. Mark, I
yeah,
don't want to cut you off. We have 15
no,
minutes left. I
no.
know if folks are interested in
Oh,
what exec
okay,
teams are
okay.
looking for and positioning
Yeah, yeah,
themselves
yeah,
for
yeah. Let me
VP.
get
So
to that.
maybe, okay.
Um, I mean, the odd answer is often exec teams don't know. Um, they know the outcome of what they want solved, but they don't know what the art of the possible is. So I often, I mean, I'm often party to creating a role with a business. If it's a first time hire, if it's a first time RevOps leader, um, definitely not if it's a replacement, or again, in the US we're much more mature. But I always tell RevOps leaders this, that what the business thinks it needs from you and what it actually needs are often miles apart. And once you're on board in the job, your job is to educate and advise and balance your support for their immediate needs with your long-term vision. So to continue to educate them on the art of the possible. Um, what does exec teams need? They don't want to make a mistake. So RevOps isn't an experiment. If they're hiring a leader, if it's a senior role, they really don't want to make a mistake. So it's your job, if you're going for that role, to give them confidence that hiring you is the right decision, and that confidence will come from validating your experience. That's one bit. So your literal experience. Sometimes it's massively prescriptive, and there's often not much you can do about it when a business says, I really only want someone that's scaled from 0 to 1, or they've gone from 5 to 10, or 10 to 50. I only want someone that's built something from scratch and build a team out from scratch, or I only want someone that's managed a large team of 20, or been part of an acquisition, or worked under PE. Or we only want someone that's reported to a CFO because they understand that. Um, so often it's, have they managed? Can they manage up? Um, have they already had a seat at the exec table? These are all the kind of the experience bullet points that you just need to build in, and you cannot control all of them. And I guess if you're looking at a role where they want something you don't have, it might be that you're not going to get that job, and it's difficult. But I'll come back to that point later, because I don't think that's always the case. Um, the nature, and I won't go into say, I always talk about RevOps as being elastic, fits around a business, stretches around it, it grows, it expands, and then it contracts when it needs to. But the nature of it being elastic means that the business expect you to fit around them. So think about what areas of experience you have that are elastic. Um, Trust is massively important. So outside of these elements, trust is, they will hire you if they trust that you can do this job and they buy into you. So it's um, and this can be a problem, actually, because a CRO might have their own go-to person they already trust. You know, you're part of a business, a new CRO joins. It's like, well, I only trust this one RevOps person. you can't fake trust. You have to earn it, but you can validate it. So as well as validating your experience, there's a ton of other things um, that help to gain that trust. So are you smart enough? This is a massively complex part of the business. I think RevOps is probably one of the most complex jobs there is. Some of the missions you need to solve are the most complex that business will ever face. So can you figure out ways forward? And guess what? Can you do it quickly? Are you growth minded? Can you flex and learn in a space that's evolving? Um, how elastic are you as a person? Um, are you an exceptional communicator? And I'm going to circle back to these points. I know we got 10 minutes when I talk about the next bit, but to position yourself as VP. But are you an exceptional communicator to the business up and down? Do you have that exec presence? Um, look, they are looking for everything. They're looking for perfection. I'm finding nowadays where I would have recruited for a business that's quite happy with a 7 out of 10, probably seven, maybe eight, ideally more, but now companies seem to want 9 or 10, and I'm not sure what that is. And I have some theories. I have a weird theory about AI and automation creating, perfection, and maybe people are starting to think that, well, I just want perfection. I don't want any loose ends. But those are some of the things. Let me talk about positioning yourself for VP and beyond, because I think these are similar um, talk tracks and crossover.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
great. And Mark, we have a few questions here too that I think will kind of cover a summary of everything you talked about. So maybe if we leave, 4 or 5 minutes at the end here, if we're able to.
okay, what time we uh, finish?
45.
45. Okay,
Yep.
let give me after 4 minutes, stop me. So
Perfect.
I think these are the main points: how to position yourself, say for VP and beyond. But it's how to position yourself up the ladder, regardless of where you are at now, regardless of how far you've gone. I think communication, trust, how you deliver, how you sell. I'll come to that. Empathy that you show, um, how you learn, honing your right brain, and how the, the biggest mission of all is how you become essential to that business. And that mitigates against a CRO wanting to bring their own person. If you're essential to that business, then you're tied to it. So communication, you'll have talked about this a lot. James, you probably talked about, master storytelling and um, using data to tell stories, um, being multilingual, and I mean that in talking CRO, talking CFO, talking COO, um, talking their language, and no one cares about RevOps until they understand why it matters to them. So the communication piece, I think, lead with clarity. Again, about this intentional piece. Be transparent about what you're trying to do and why it matters, and be intentional in your role. So lead with clarity. Let people know what's expected of them, what you need from them, how you're going to do it. This transparency is what's going to win you, friends and allies. Go to the exec team and continue to ask them what they need from RevOps. Be respectfully visible. Um, you know, I appreciate that not everyone understands RevOps or has a different requirement. What do you need? Doesn't mean that you're having to bow to all these people, but it's useful to know. And communication is also about listening. Like, what does the business want? What you're hearing? What flags are you picking up? Um, Trust. I've talked upon. It is hard to build trust, but it's about being highly effective in your role. It's about listening and responding, pushing back responsibly, um, delivering. I think you need to deliver value, and you need to deliver it early and often. So solving an immediate problem. If you're building a RevOps business, you want to iterate, you want to prove value, you want to iterate, you want to prove value, you want to build it up. Um, Selling. So I don't mean selling the product or the service that you're working, but learn the art of internal selling. Persuasion. I don't know if anyone knows about persuasion, but persuasion is seeding ideas or declaring your intentions to drive change before you actually do it. And I think it's a really powerful thing to think about. Again, it's about transparency and intentions, and then learning the art of persuasion and influence. Empathy is vastly important. Walking in the shoes of sales and marketing, if you're going to speak their language, if you're going to be multilingual in these functions, then learn how they think and talk, and then learn, talk to people, network, be curious, keep learning, stay ahead of the curve, build your leadership skills. And I think keep learning is a thing. Keep reading books. Pick up Harris's book, The RevOps Pendulum. Even if you've been in RevOps for, I don't know if anyone's been in it for more than 10 years, but even if you have, refresh, read it. It's changing. The elasticity of RevOps is also, it's an evolution. It's not staying the same. So keep talking to your peers, listen to others, establish what best practice should be now, and but don't rest on your laurels on what it is. Um, you're always being sold to, right? And you don't have tons of time to set aside to see what all the new tech is, but you should know what's out there. You should be listening to these pitches. I don't want to mention AI. We've avoided it till now, but you
It's
could
a whole
also
other
be the drive.
45 minutes.
Pardon? Yeah.
That's a whole
Well,
another 45 minutes. Yeah.
exactly. But you could be the driver of change in AI in a business. But but you need to be ahead of the curve. You need to know what's happening. Go to events, go to, the RevOps Alliance events I'm going to in a few weeks. Be present, understand your profession from an external perspective. Be the person that can walk into a room of 100 non-RevOps people and go, this is what it is. Understand how to articulate it. Um, I I I'm hurrying along here, but I talk about left brain and right brain in RevOps, two distinct aspects: optimizing the machine, optimizing and influencing people. So you're the architect and the conductor, science and the art. And you can be the best architect, best data scientist, the most knowledgeable about tech. You could be the greatest executor or operator or even strategist in RevOps. But if no one cares, you will fail. Getting people to care is the key to ultimate success in RevOps.
Yeah.
And yeah,
It comes back to like showing your impact for the business, right? And what do people actually care about, and how do you show that those are the things you're working on and impacting?
exactly, absolutely. I feel like we're running out of time.
Yeah.
I've got lots more. I mean, being essential to a business that I think let them see no other way to scale with you as a business partner. If you can make that your intent, your super objective, I'm going to be essential to this business, then it's going to help you move up that ladder. Um, should we do some questions? I've
Yeah, I
got
think
a
that's
few things about interviewing and resumes and stuff. Maybe we do another one of these. I've got,
yeah, we could follow up for sure. And I know, Mark, you occasionally make yourself available for folks too. But yeah, we have a few minutes left. Let's get through some of these questions. So Matt McGee asked, and hey, Matt, earlier you touched
yeah,
on the part of the challenge of showing impact. Like there's the difference between what the business thinks it needs and what it actually needs. And
yeah.
you have to kind of drive what it actually needs. I think folks feel a lot of tension and challenge in that. And, I've actually heard myself from RevOps come in and they say, like, I know what the business needs, but that's not what executives want. So, like, how can folks actually change opinion so that their impact is seen and measured, that they're working on the right things?
I think it's about doing it responsibly. And, I made that point about, iterate, prove value. I think you probably want to, you know, it's it's very, this is, whilst we talk about the science of revenue growth, it's a very social role. It's a very it's far more people led than we really realize until we lift the lid. So it's about um, listening to what people want and responding and doing that and achieving what you want and letting people know that you have their back and that you are the business partner that can help them do that. But at the same time, respectfully saying, however, for me to help you and the business, there are certain things that I think we should be doing. And you don't want to steamroll in and go, so, I'm not going to listen to what anyone wants or do anything that anyone here is suggesting. But it's a bit of a little tug of war around, you know, actually everything that I want to do is for the betterment of this organization, of the sales, of the marketing, um, and the revenue engine. But we're not doing it, and I think it's probably fair to try something
Yeah.
that you know, I believe is going to be useful. But let's try it, and don't be afraid to say this. You know, this is an experiment, and maybe I mean I mentioned RevOps is an experiment, but you can experiment iteratively.
Yeah, and I think that's where persuasion comes back in as well. And also just bandwidth. Like we've seen folks, and this is a very accounting centric viewpoint, but folks in RevOps spending so much time pulling data together, reporting, they don't have time to go be proactive and do these things the business needs. Automate all this work. You now have an extra, 20% of your work week to have this time to go knock down those things that the business really needs. So that can help too. Another question, Mark, from Christina, and we can probably go a couple minutes over here. Um, and sorry, not actually for Christina, a different question. Would welcome your thoughts on how to communicate an intentional career while interviewing. I think you mentioned earlier that that's
Hmm.
important, especially in light of like if their career has kind of begun before RevOps was even really recognized as a distinct
Yeah, yeah,
function.
yeah. I think you do. It's I could do a whole session on interviewing, right? But um, anyone that's spoken to me about interviewing, I have a very stock answer to the question. Tell me about yourself, and this plays to this intentional piece. I know there's a few people joining that I've spoken to about this. Um, the question, tell me about yourself, is a bit of a trap because you can go on a long 45-minute ramble like I've just done, and you're not listening, and it's not going to get you anywhere. So the answer to that question is, in my opinion, this is who I am, this is how I got here, and this is where I want to go. And you're already, so you're being very defined and incredibly intentional. And if I hear someone answer that obviously not in those exact words, but this is where I'm at. This is my job now. I'm working for this company, blah, blah, blah. This is how I got here. This was the journey I took. Maybe took a few tangents, and this is where I want to go to. It's music to my ears because that's the intentional piece. I recognize um, the sound of someone who knows where they want to go, and I think you buy into that. And I think that's powerful. And then you can then draw on that in that interview. So let's talk about why um, I've chosen to be in this interview. Why you have you've created this path for yourself, and you're not falling into this. If someone accidentally, I don't think anyone's accidentally going to interview, but if they're there and it's half-hearted or it's passive or they're there because it sounds interesting, it's fine, but it's not going to excite me or a hiring manager or a business more than someone that says, I want to be here because I've thought about this a lot and it feels right. And I will validate now why I want to do that and why you should hire me.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers a bit of the question.
Yeah, that's great. Another question here around folks who have kind of come up in RevOps through startups or small business, where it's say you don't have access to a lot of tools or larger teams, and often the roles are a little bit more amorphous beyond traditional RevOps. So this question says, they've been in marketing, sales, and RevOps while also touching the executive leadership team. If
Yeah.
someone's moving into more like traditional, well-structured function, like how would you advise this person to like spin that or use that, or any thoughts on like if that's like a barrier at all?
I mean, there's always barriers. I think back to my point, recognize recognize the gaps before anyone else does, and then address them. There's enough out there. I mean, there's probably things you can do in the job, and again, declaring your appetite to do more of something that you haven't done before can work in your favor. Um, the um, the, the person that I spoke to recently that recruits for this big PE firm, a big RevOps recruiter. I mean, he read every book and studied as I have. I've taken a course in RevOps. I think you can upskill yourself externally, and use that to your advantage. I think recognize what the differences are, and maybe talk to someone like me who can say these are the pitfalls. This is why you might be left behind because the structures here are going to be different. But I think find a mentor who can help you and guide you. Identify those gaps as early as you possibly can. Um, Nothing is impossible, and this profession is still new, so it's not like there isn't time for everyone to expand their horizons into lots of different types of business areas.
Yeah.
But those experience points that I mentioned before are just something you need to identify.
That's great. And last question here, a little bit of a different flavor from Will, and then we'll let you rest your voice, Mark. We appreciate all the knowledge you've shared.
Yeah,
A little
that's
bit
right.
different. Will is curious if you and or 3Search have a perspective, whether it's qualitative or quantitative from internal research on CRO and VP of RevOps tenure. It seems like these are tough jobs, a lot of turnover. What do you see as typical tenure for those folks?
I think current thinking is depending on the size of the business. CRO tenure at the moment is something like 17 months.
Wow.
Um, I don't know if that's um, uh, uh, Will Will Sullivan,
Yes.
but yeah, I think I don't know whether it was him that we were discussing, and I think it was. But a CRO shouldn't take a job as a CRO that doesn't have RevOps now. So I think that might be why 17 months tenure is the case. VP sales probably slightly longer. I haven't got up-to-date stats on it, but it can be a poison chalice. I think the mistake company or individuals are making when they take those roles are they're not doing enough due diligence. They're being wowed by, maybe money and adventure and long-term opportunity, but they're not actually doing enough due diligence to realize that the business doesn't have the foundational ability to grow and maybe doesn't have a successful or talented RevOps team.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll cap it there. We're over. Mark, this is amazing. There's so much more to probably unpack in each of those topics. And maybe we should do another session on each of them or multiple of them. So, folks
Sure.
listening, there's a survey after this call. If you want to go deeper into these topics, let us know and maybe we'll set that up. Mark, I'm super grateful for you sharing your insight. I'm sure you'd be happy for folks to ping you with any questions that they didn't get to answer
Please
today.
do. Absolutely. Time allowing, I'm happy to chat to people. And thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I'd love some feedback if you want to message me, like what bits were interesting and what weren't, and I can share some of that more and probably bite-size some of them into LinkedIn posts. It's my
Perfect.
content
Well,
done for the year.
yeah, think of 3Search if you're ever on the hunt for more RevOps talent to your org or you're looking to make a move. Mark and the team are great over there. Mark, thanks again. We will be in touch soon. Really appreciate the time. It's great.
Thank you so much. Absolutely.
Thanks everybody for the time. Cheers.
Bye bye.